Good morning. On Webster today, a very special appearance, pre-taped yesterday, of a social credit cabinet minister by the name of Dr. Pat McGeer, who has taken on the role of spirited defender of his government's image and reputation and attacker of the press. And he says all the criticisms of social credit by the press is nothing but piffle. Piffle. Trivial, nonsensical garbage, in fact. McGeer will be on the program this morning. Also today, we're going to take a second bite at the very sad story, third bite in fact, the very sad story of 24-year-old Andy Van Amerongen. In and out of jail since he was 14, now serving life for murder, no possibility of parole, for 10 years. And here to fill us in with some of the tragic aspects of this particular case of this young Dutch citizen is Peter Ritchie, Vancouver lawyer. And we'll be talking to Ritchie about fascinating aspects of this case, including a dying declaration which couldn't be used under our rules of evidence after the break. In July 1976, a young fellow about 19 called Andy Van Amerongen was finishing a sentence, coming close to the end of a sentence, when a prisoner was killed in Matsqui Institution, was murdered. And Andy Amerongen was one of 3 men charged. He was found guilty. 25 years, no possibility of parole for 10 years. So what, you say, it happens all the time. Peter Ritchie acted for Andy Van Amerongen, and I think the first point I'd like to make with you, Mr. Amerongen, before we go into the family circumstances, is the fact, does this case make you fearful of any automatic return to capital punishment?
Well, let's start with this basis. Let's be clear on what the sentence was and what the sentence is in this country for being convicted of murder. It's life imprisonment. There's 2 types of murder. There's first-degree murder and there's second-degree murder. And for first-degree murder, there's parole provisions that are different than second-degree murder. First-degree murder, the minimum parole period is 25 years. If one is convicted of first-degree murder, you don't get out of jail for 25 years. Second-degree murder has different parole provisions. There's a minimum of 10, a maximum then of 20. So there is a difference in which is first and which is second in terms of the significance of time spent in prison. The difference between first and between second is set out in the criminal code. And the criminal code says that murder is first degree if it's in a certain category. For instance, if it's planned or deliberate, or if it's the murder of a sheriff or the police officer in the course of his duties, or if it takes place during the commission of certain offenses, hijacking of aircraft, or if a person has a previous conviction. Those generally are the categories that prescribe to first-degree murder. Now, the concern that you ask about has to do with what I perceive to be the frailty of our judicial system. If capital punishment is to be imposed, it would probably be imposed for something like what is presently defined as first-degree murder. And our system is by no means a foolproof system. People may think that it is, and people may think that if a crime is serious enough, that the sentence should be serious enough also. What I think people are forgetting is that the system is not foolproof, and this case typifies that example.
There are other aspects of the Amerongen case which interested me when Alida Van Amerongen, the mother, came to see me in the first instance. First, that this boy has a truly traditionally tragic background, starting out with problems at 12 with the mental health people, and then 14 the Maples, and then a long succession of minor crimes until he finishes up in a jail where one way or another he seems to have been involved in a murder, and finishes up as a Dutch citizen, which is unusual, doing a minimum 10 years for second-degree murder in the bucket, right?
Well, of course, the citizenship doesn't enter into any considerations as to guilt or innocence in a murder. It has nothing to do with it.
Agreed.
Except the taxpayer has to pay for someone being in a prison that's a citizen of a different country.
Well, what are the aspects of this case? We'll come back to the citizenship later and the family's history. What are the aspects of this case which seems to demonstrate the frailty of the system? The judicial system, the system of justice.
Let me set the background a bit. The evidence in this very lengthy murder case is essentially the evidence of one witness who is another inmate who made certain observations at the time that that inmate was in his cell. He could see through the door of his cell across a narrow hallway partially into the cell of another inmate. It was that other inmate that was murdered. And he was able to see at that time some very limited observations for a very short period of time, something like 5 minutes at the very maximum. In any event, what he was able to see, briefly speaking, was a person sitting in the door who he identified as one of the accused. He was able to see Andy Van Amerongen in the cell, and he was able to see a hand in a cell holding a knife. He heard some noises and some screams and that sort of thing. That essentially was what he was able to observe in a visual sense.
Mm-hmm.
Now, during the time he made these observations, at all times, Van Amerongen remained in the cell. He was sitting in a fashion that was described, and I suppose there's no better term for it, as sitting half-assed on a desk somewhere in the back of the cell, and remained in that position until all 4 people tumbled out of the cell and ran down the hallway. Now, I'm abbreviating the evidence in a very large
Obviously,
measure here.
yes, so we can understand it.
In any event, at all material times, this main Crown witness, who was an inmate in the prison, saw Van Amerongen in the position that I have described. The person in the cell who was stabbed and who later died was taken from the institution, which was the Matsqui prison, a federal penitentiary, and brought to a hospital. And at the time that he was in the hospital, he was inveigled to make some statements. He was persuaded by the police to make statements, and he was reluctant to speak to the police, as anyone who has an understanding of our prison system can readily understand.
If you talk, you're in trouble.
You talk, you're in trouble. You don't talk to the police. You don't cooperate with the police. That is their ethic. In any event, the police, in pursuit of their investigation, had a prison guard with whom this deceased was friendly come to speak to him. The police positioned themselves behind a hospital screen in the hospital room, and were able to make notes as they listened to a conversation between...
Let me stop you there, because reading this as a layman, reading the transcript as a layman, had this, and I'm not joking, been a television script, you know, the Raymond Burr type thing and all the rest of it. The man who had been stabbed, within an hour and a half of dying, made what appears to be a statement that would clear Amerongen.
Correct.
A dying declaration to the layman.
We'll call that to a layman, right?
A dying declaration to a layman.
Right.
And in fact, that might have, had it been a legitimate dying declaration, cleared Amerongen altogether.
Well, it certainly would have gone a very long way to help the jury in their understanding of determining what his role was.
The man who was dying made a statement in which he said, somebody said, "Who stabbed you?" And he mentioned 2 names. He did not mention the 3rd name of Amerongen.
The statement was made by the deceased a few hours after he was stabbed and a few hours before he died, and that statement essentially exonerates Van Amerongen.
But that statement was not able to be used at the trial.
That statement was inadmissible. That statement is inadmissible. The jury never heard about it. The Court of Appeal, therefore, would never hear about it. The Supreme Court of Canada, where this case went on different grounds, never heard about it.
And therefore, he was properly, finally, completely, totally, Amerongen, we're talking about, convicted of murder and now serves his minimum 10 years, maximum 25.
Quite so.
Peter Ritchie, more about the dying declaration, fascinating to laypersons, and more about the Andy Van Amerongen himself after the break.
Change your mic, sir, because not
Quite right?
no, it's not quite right. It's all right, but it's not quite right. So we're gonna change.
Jack, just so you got that straight, for first degree, it's a minimum 25 years.
I understand
And
that.
for second degree, it's a 10 to 20.
He could have been convicted of first degree.
Well, that's the point. That's
What's
why-
this like, Ross? Okay. Do you think this is okay? Okay. Right.
Go quickly.
So you-
I'm sorry you want to see this McGeer thing.
Right. It's just
All right.
That's a good thing.
I wouldn't say that. Wouldn't, it was quite a
Spirited battle.
That was the
retarded.
I've taken it out. Out. Okay.
So do you want to talk about that? Before we get into mechanics of what happened during There is no legal argument anymore.
There is no legal argument as to the conviction of second-degree murder, 25 years, minimum 10 years before parole, of Andy Van Amerongen. But Peter Ritchie, the lawyer, was just explaining to me this fascinating aspect of the case about the dying declaration. Okay, supposing somebody stabs me, touch wood, and I decide to say who stabbed me. In what circumstances? And I'm dead an hour later. Is that evidence admissible in a court of law in British Columbia?
You start with the premise that out-of-court statements made by others than an accused is what generally is referred to as hearsay. That's the premise.
And if I'm dead, I'm not there, therefore I'm out of court.
You can't come to court, you can't be cross-examined, so that, generally speaking, would be referred to as hearsay and therefore be inadmissible. It becomes an exception to the general hearsay rules of evidence if it falls into a certain well-defined category. And this category has been defined in law for something over 200 years at the present time. That is, the person who dies, first of all, must die. He must make a statement that relates to the cause of his death. And he must also have a settled, hopeless expectation of death.
That's what I was looking for.
The settled, hopeless expectation of death was lacking in this particular case of Van Amerongen.
Before you come to Van Amerongen, if a man who has been attacked is told by the doctor that he's about to die, you know, that it's all over, that he's got a couple of hours to live, and he himself has a settled, hopeless expectation of death, a statement could then be taken from him formally or informally and used as evidence in the trial.
Doesn't have to be formal at all. If those categories are fulfilled, then what he says, Mr. Smith stabbed me, is admissible in evidence.
Now, in this case, a statement was made, but it was not admissible. Take a little time and tell me why not. Just what.
Well, it has to fit into those categories. The first aspects of the category were well fulfilled, but the latter one, the settled, hopeless expectation of death, was not. And the reason that it appears to be is that a young intern, I'm advised in the situation, by the Crown and by the police, had indicated to this deceased momentarily before these words were spoken to the guard, with the police taking notes hidden in the background, that this particular deceased was going to make it, that he was going to live. And the deceased then expressed an indication to see his girlfriend in the morning or something to that effect.
Two aspects. One, the intern or somebody said, "You're going to be all right," or words generally to that effect, perhaps even just to cheer him up.
Perhaps.
And secondly, he had asked to be able to see his girlfriend the next day.
Yes.
And that's quite clear, therefore, that at that stage, the stabbed prisoner did not have a settled, hopeless expectation of death imminently,
Right,
did he?
so. That's right.
So therefore, and what was said, actually, to the guard with the policeman hiding behind the screen?
Well, the notes of the police officers that were taken right at the time, if I can paraphrase them somewhat, because the statement was somewhat lengthy, the notes were that two people came into the cell, and he named the two people after a fashion, and that the two people had a motive for attacking him, and the motive was outlined, and he described somewhat how the attack took place and how the stabbing took place.
In other words, Amerongen was not implicated as such in what was in fact, the dying declaration of the man who had been stabbed.
When one examines the facts as they were led by the Crown and the statement as it relates to the circumstances, Van Amerongen was not even not implicated, he was exonerated by an examination of this statement.
Well, of course, the dead man could have been wrong in his interpretation of the situation.
Well, he may have been.
He may have been. But as a proper dying declaration, I mean, if it had fulfilled all these expectations, just I'm speaking purely hypothetically because he's been properly convicted in every way, shape or form, it would seem, that might have, in different circumstances, enabled Amerongen to walk out.
That's always difficult to know. The case that was very, very marginal against Van Amerongen, I've given a brief outline of what the case was. There's very little more to it. There's something that happened slightly after the stabbing that the Court of Appeal took...
Get rid of the knife, get rid of the knife.
Yes, the Court of Appeal took note of. And that, I'm suggesting, was taken somewhat out of context. And I think a good argument can be made to explain the significance of that was that it was equally significant to another inmate who was cleaning up blood on the tier, totally unrelated to the circumstances.
Things in Matsquay that afternoon, you know, I can't help making this observation, were somewhat bizarre.
Well, it was a long trial, and during that trial there was a lot of evidence concerning bizarre activities that occur in that.
There were no guards inside the place?
There were supposed to be guards just down the tier, and there was no guards that gave evidence, and one can infer that they weren't there.
Nobody put people back in the cells after the killing?
There were actions taken after the killing, sometime after.
Somebody was flogging lids of marijuana around the place?
There's a great deal of evidence about the sale of marijuana in the institution.
At that particular time?
Correct.
The layman just doesn't know what happens, does he?
I think there were a lot of revelations that came forward from that trial.
So therefore, here we are with the situation that, oh, this is why, I presume, or is it because of this dying declaration situation that made you tell me that our system of justice in these cases is sometimes very frail indeed?
Well, judge it for yourself. It sits on a gossamer thread if it can be established that the settled, hopeless expectation of death isn't quite there. And if there is a dying declaration that would exonerate someone in circumstances somewhat equivalent to this, then one would want to think, I would suggest, long and hard before imposing capital punishment if the system is subject to such frailties as this.
I mean, the very fact that some medical person may have just been trying to cheer the man up instead of telling him the clinical facts which might have been visible at that time.
That would have the effect of the subjective point of view of that speaker who subsequently dies as not fitting into this category. Therefore, the evidence is inadmissible. Therefore, a jury would never hear it.
You probably brushed aside my mention of the citizenship of the boy from a legal point of view. The fact that he's a Dutch citizen still has no bearing whatsoever on his treatment in the courts in this country.
None.
But does it not have a bearing perhaps on a compassionate look at his future?
Well, I suppose there's two sides to that argument. It could be argued that it may be disadvantageous for the taxpayers to spend the $30,000 a year or whatever it costs to keep him in our prison system. At the same time, it might be argued that a foreigner can't come here and commit a crime and hope only to be deported if he's convicted. So I suppose that argument can be...
Peter Ritchie, next you're going to meet briefly Alida Van Amerongen, Andy's mother, on the other, what I regard as the really compassionate aspects of this particular case outside the legal proceedings, after the break.
It's right, isn't it? I think that is the most important thing. No,
it's not.
It's
No,
an
you're wrong,
unstable
Alida.
witness.
Alida, we said at the very beginning that there are no further avenue of legal appeals. You're
No,
dead on that.
I know.
I'm sure some of you remember the funny coincidence that kind of attracted me to this case. I think it doesn't have any bearing on my judgment on it. But in 1939, when I was on my honeymoon, and actually it was in Belgium, in Blankenberg, I met Alida Van Amerongen's cousin, Isaac Van Amerongen, on the Hotel Pacific de Liège, which is now a parking lot. And when you came here, I said, we discovered this vague acquaintanceship, and I said, where's Isaac now? And you said?
He died in Auschwitz.
In the gas chambers?
Yeah.
Many of your family, the Van Amerongen tree of the Jewish people in Amsterdam and Holland, died in Auschwitz.
All of them. I'll be the only one alive.
Do you collect a pension because of this?
Yeah.
From?
From the, it's called WUF, World Underprivileged Person, not underprivileged.
It's a form of reparation through the Dutch government to
Yeah.
you, which you collect.
Yeah.
Where is your home now?
I live in Abbotsford at the moment, but I came back. I went back to Holland after the conviction from my son, and then I came back to try if I could get him out.
And you're still a Dutch citizen?
Yes.
And he is a Dutch citizen?
He is a Dutch citizen.
When did he first get into trouble?
Actually, When he was 12, he had a learning disability. His hand would get wet and his paper get dirty, so he wouldn't hand in his assignments.
Mind you, you'd had a fairly troubled life yourself to that point. You had been in Auschwitz too.
Yeah.
And you came out here and you weren't particularly settled at the time, were you? And you had lots of problems.
Oh, yeah.
You had lots, and you and your husband split up.
Yeah.
Because of the convictions, largely.
Yeah.
Now, Andy, therefore, had trouble at school. When did he first get into the hands of the law?
When he was 12, he was put off by mental health and the welfare of school.
When did he go into the Maples?
When he was about, not even when he was 14, just before he was 14. Then in the Maples, I visited him and he was stoned out of his mind on acid. So I took him out against mental health and welfare. And to punish me, they cut off my family allowance for the 2 kids.
Just let me take it for granted that Andy had gone through the trauma which so many youngsters who get into trouble go through, of going to the Maples, coming out of the Maples, getting into trouble with the law, and finally went into jail at what age?
Before he was 15, he was sent 14. He went
Which
into
jail
Haney.
was he in? He went into Haney.
Yeah.
How long between the time he was 14 and the time of the murder was he out free and clear on the street?
Not even, I think, 5 months altogether.
So he's been in jail since he was 14?
Since he was 14.
And is he mentally unstable by your definition?
No, he is not.
He's all right
He's
now.
a very sensitive boy.
What would happen if you got him back to Holland?
Nothing. He would be a free man, and he would get mental treatment, and he would get a pension from the same organization as I have, because many kids that are born out of a marriage like mine, that the mother or the father has been in a concentration camp, the whole family wiped out, those kids are considered an after-war case.
What I've done, Peter, on this on just a common sense basis, and you may think I'm crazy or not crazy, I've asked the system in Ottawa to look at this particular case to see if there's justification to somehow or other get him out short of his 10-year parole and go back to live with his mother in Amsterdam. Am I being unreasonable? Do you think it's a...
I don't know how successful you're going to be
No.
by doing it. Van Amerongen has exhausted every legal remedy he has, with the possible exception of one. He's been to the BC Court of Appeal, the highest court in the province. He's been to the Supreme Court of Canada asking for leave to appeal, and that leave was denied. The only recourse he has is the mercy of the Crown, and there is a specific section in the Criminal Code that says the Minister of Justice can review a case, and if exceptional circumstances are found, can exercise the Crown's mercy. That's the only course he has.
Oh, that's a kind of traditional royal prerogative of some kind, I suppose.
I think that's the history of it.
Now, in fact, he was convicted of second-degree murder.
He was convicted of second-degree murder. He was charged with first-degree murder, but convicted of second-degree murder.
And he didn't give evidence.
Let me explain that. As I said earlier, first-degree murder carries with it the life imprisonment and 25 years no parole. Second-degree murder is the 10-year parole provision. He was charged with first-degree murder, and the Crown's theory was that the murder was planned and deliberate. Therefore, if a murder is planned and deliberate, it is first-degree.
25-year minimum.
That's right. At the close of the Crown's case, as you know, when a trial progresses, the Crown calls all its witnesses, and then the defense is entitled, if so chosen, to give evidence. In any event, at the close of the Crown's evidence, the defense counsel, all three of them, joined in a motion to say that there was no evidence of planning and deliberation. In other words, the Crown brought the wrong charge, that there should only be a trial on second-degree murder. And this is very, very significant because of the penal provisions that pertain. The judge does not look at penal provisions when determining if there is any evidence of first-degree murder, but he simply looks to see if there is some evidence of planning and deliberation. There was none. The judge, however, decided that the timing of the ruling as to whether the trial should proceed on a first-degree basis or second-degree basis would be after, at the close of the trial, and not at the close of the Crown's case, which incidentally is the position is different in Ontario. Just so I can explain that so it's clear from a layman's point of view, the Crown calls their evidence. There was no evidence of planning and deliberation. Therefore, there was no evidence of first-degree murder.
Right.
And the defense took the position that since there is no evidence of first-degree murder, then an accused should not be tried for something that the Crown can't produce any evidence. There's no evidence to support that charge. But that there was evidence, as slim as it was, pertaining to Van Amerongen, pertaining to a second degree, and that Van Amerongen was perfectly entitled to testify on a second degree charge. Now, his choice at the close of the Crown's case, because the judge made the ruling, was to testify or not to testify. Let me just go a step ahead of myself here. The judge ultimately told the jury, after the case was completely, the evidence was all in, that he said, "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, there is no evidence of first-degree murder. You can only consider a verdict on second-degree murder. There is no evidence of first degree," as the defense was urging at the close of the Crown's case. The judge, however, decided that he would not make that ruling until the evidence from the defense was in, until the defense selected to testify or otherwise. If Van Amerongen had testified, he may or may not have been convicted, of course. If he was convicted, the danger that Van Amerongen faced would be that somehow, somewhere in his cross-examination, the jury may infer that there was some planning.
And he'd have faced with the found
And he
guilty
would have got
25 years straight.
and been released in the year 2004, and that was the decision facing him at that time. The law was unsettled at that time in British Columbia, as it generally is in Canada, as to whether that particular judge was correct in ruling that the trial should proceed as a first degree at that particular time.
Oh, I see. So therefore, obvious, it was wise not for Andy Van Amerongen to testify.
Very, very, very difficult to know if it was wise. It took away the danger of his being convicted of first degree by his not testifying. However, it obviously contributed to his conviction of second degree by not testifying.
Well, it's a sad story. And as you said at the beginning, that it demonstrates the frailty of our system on occasions.
Something that a jury may not be aware of. These considerations make some decisions in a serious cases like this very frail indeed.
And of course, the jury had had everything, all the evidence there was, except the quote-dying, unquote declaration. It's a shame, isn't it?
Something that we as citizens should know about before we start discussing capital punishment, I would suggest.
Very good. Well, Alida Van Amerongen, you're still in Canada at the moment. Do you plan soon to return, or are you going to wait and see if
I'm going to wait. If he doesn't go out, I'll move back where he is now. Because he should have visited. He got only one in the world.
we won't discuss it in more detail on that at the moment. You are his only relative left.
Yeah.
And his father, of course. who's
Yeah,
in
but he
Holland.
never heard anything about it.
He is in Holland. Best of luck, Alida.
Thank you very
And
much.
I'm grateful to you for your cooperation and your insights into our somewhat and occasional frail system of the administration of justice. My thanks to Peter W. Ritchie and to Alida Van Amerongen. Next, we're going to give you the special... Sit down, Alida. Sit down, don't go yet. We're going to give you the special performance, one time only, between, what's my name again? Jack Webster and Dr. Patrick McGeer. The subject is piffle. After the break. Night before last, Pat McGeer came to a very spirited attack on the media in defense of the image of the social credit government of which he is a prominent member. I decided that we should not lose the opportunity to hear it firsthand from Dr. McGeer himself. It begins like this. When politicians and governments are in trouble, they've got one sure, safe way to go. Blame the press, blame the radio, blame the television. Since Social Credit was elected in the summer of 1979, they have, I can say without fear of favour, been in nothing but trouble. They've had all kinds of difficult situations, ranging from that very poor election campaign which they almost lost, through the dirty tricks, through the scattering of $1,000 bills, through the questions about redistribution and allegations of gerrymandering, through the legislature itself, where for many a long day, more than 17, Premier Bennett himself refused to answer directly almost a single solitary question. The other day in Vancouver, Pat McGeer, Minister of Science, Technology, etc., the one-man brains trust of Social Credit, decided to come to the defense of his government's admittedly poor image. There is no doubt about it that the government is being hammered, especially by the print media, on the lack of decisive action in many cases and on the image of Premier Bennett. Mr. McGeer, Dr. McGeer, you're one of the people quoted who admits that the image of your government is not good. You're surely not going to tell me the image is not good merely because of what the press or the media says about your government.
That's precisely what I'm saying. The very word image has a meaning of unreality about it.
All right.
And just as I said to those people who came over, the hit squad from the Vancouver Sun, as I've called them, and as all the other cabinet ministers said, and as all the backbenchers said, they were barking up the wrong tree entirely. I'm not a difficult man to understand. I'm very plain spoken, and people can't misunderstand the intent of the message that I give them.
So what is your message?
What I said right from the start is that you people are not dealing with the substance of government. You're not dealing with the important issues to the public of British Columbia. Instead, what you're doing is you're writing about garbage and rubbish, and then you're coming back and saying, are people believing our garbage and rubbish? And what I'm saying is, it is garbage and rubbish, and the sooner that the press get down to reporting the substance of government, the issues that are important to the people of British Columbia, the better the government will be in this province,
Question.
regardless of whether it's Social Credit or somebody else.
Question, though.
Forget about the smoke screen and tell us whether the government is better run now than it's ever been in its history. And I say it is. And I say it's time the media began to criticize us for those things that we're doing badly.
You're the man who's put yourself on the
badly.
block right now. Let me give you another question. Do you say to me that your government at this moment has a good reputation in handling matters which have been properly brought to the surface? Do you have a good reputation as a government?
I say that we have never had better government in British Columbia.
That's not the question I asked you.
Nor have we ever had worse media.
Do you have, in the minds of a reasonable observer, a good reputation in the way you handle the following things? Dirty tricks, right? The $1,000 bills gleefully splashed around with the improper reporting of election funds. The allegations of gerrymandering were still waiting many moons hereafter for the proluption report so-called. The Marguerite, probably the worst-handled public issue that I've seen in 30 years watching what's going on in Victoria. Now, do you honestly think that a sane member of the public can have a high opinion of your reputation on these issues by themselves?
Jack, I've heard you rehearse an incantation of trivia, and not one single matter of substance in the whole long list. And if you ask me whether or not the media is doing a good job of reporting the important things that are before the eyes of government and therefore bear on whether this province is going to do well in the future or not, I say that you've missed it by a million miles.
You are totally evading my question.
And you two are dealing in trivia. No,
you have
evaded
my question.
I'm getting at the substance.
Answer my question.
I'm getting at the substance by saying, Jack, what you're dealing with is trivia and nonsense. And this is what I said to the public last night when I ripped up a copy of the Vancouver Sun and their interview about a hit squad, or their interview about the image of the Premier, because it doesn't deal with the substance of the Premier, the leadership of his government, the support he has in cabinet, the support he has in the backbench, and the support I believe that he has with the general public.
McGeer.
He doesn't have
McGeer.
He doesn't have the support of the media and people like yourself simply because you're dealing with piffle.
Dr. McGeer, are you suggesting that the way this government handled the appalling business of telling your people to write false letters to the newspapers, fully tolerated, it would seem, in lack of action, that is piffle? Is it therefore the policy of social credit to regard such misdirection of writing phony letters as piffle to be ignored?
Jack,
Answer the question.
How was that dealt with?
It was
dealt with
abominably.
It was dealt with by a police investigation, and what was the recommendation of that?
That an ethics committee be set up.
No, Jack.
That was the final one.
No, no, Jack.
Where 8
Tell
people
the truth.
fired? Where 8 people fired? Laid off? Separated?
Jack, tell the truth. What was the essence of that police report? There was nothing of substance. That was the essence of it all. Yes, indeed. Some people lost
You
their
admit
jobs,
these things
and they deserved to lose their
Right.
jobs.
And did your government and its leader ignore it and attempt to put it underneath the table time after time after time, when it could have been dealt with in 5 minutes in the first instance, couldn't it?
Jack, what did they do? They had a police investigation to find out if there was substance. And what was the result of that investigation, Jack? Nothing of substance. Yes, it should never have been advocated, and the people who advocated it were fired.
Question. What happened to the police investigation and recommendations in the Ritchie case?
That came forward and was dealt with as Mr. Williams described to you in the House. It was put before the responsible people, civil servants, not politicians. They came down with a recommendation that the government accepted. But because you didn't like their recommendation, you attacked the government for it.
No,
Again,
no.
piffle and not substance,
Not
Jack.
piffle. It was substance. It was a matter which had to be properly explored, especially when the member in question later got up and thanked the Lord that the Attorney General's merry men were looking after him or he wouldn't be in that house.
Certainly, because otherwise he'd have been tried by the media.
What about the $1,000 bills? Was that piffle too? The $65,000 which came from nowhere and was spent in the election campaign but forgot to be reported? Is that the kind of piffle that you prefer we ignored?
Now, Jack, what was it that was not included in the returns that were filed? Bills that weren't received. I got bills in my election campaign after I'd filed too.
Dr. McGeer.
There's a terminal date for filing. And I might say again that the person who's involved is not in that job any longer.
How long did that take? Who brought that to the surface?
But once more, Jack.
Was it your government or was it the media?
Was there anything illegal done? Were there any laws broken? Have any charges been laid? No. And
A law may have been broken.
I come right back to say, Jack,
No.
if there's
back to the very
if there's
point.
substance and laws have been broken, then we have courts to deal with that honestly and fairly. But your problem, and the problem with other people in the media, is they like to have trials through the media. That's your problem.
Dr.
It's an
McGeer.
image problem, and this is why you're ignoring substance, and you should be condemned for it.
Dr. McGeer, let's go back to the $1,000 bill case. You and I have been around this province a long time. Were you not appalled to find out, as a Social Credit Party member, that a sum of $65,000 received in cash had been gaily disbursed and not reported? Were you not appalled?
That money, Jack, was reported. That was reported.
Eventually it was reported.
No. What was reported subsequently
the file was amended.
Was a series of bills that came in after that election campaign had closed.
Dr.
Now, what
McGeer.
you're doing, again, is you're taking something which is trivial, which does not involve a charge. You're trying somebody through the media, and this is what I say. You're creating an image. You're creating a smokescreen. But you're not getting down to the substance of government and why this province has never been more prosperous than it is today. It's more prosperous than it has ever been because of strong leadership, because of good government, and this is why you have...
You have now repeated this homily 10 times.
Certainly, and I'll repeat it 100 times. Do you know why? Because it's the truth.
And because you won't answer my specific questions about what you regard as piffle.
That's correct, because I think it's time you stopped dealing with piffle and you began to deal with the important issues. Now, either you people don't want to do it, which I suspect, or you can't do it.
I think we can do both.
I think it's because you don't want to do it.
It's absolutely essential that an alert press watches every action of every premier and every public official. And where something becomes obvious and you are not acting, if the press do not expose you, and I'm talking about you generically, you will continue in a worse manner to badly administer the province. Now, don't you dare tell me, Dr. McGeer, that the dirty tricks was not an important issue which had to be disclosed. It had to be. or you'd be going on still doing dirty tricks, wouldn't you?
Jack, you're starting to perspire and get excited, and I don't disagree with you that
Not
the
excited, a
job,
little angry perhaps at your speciously fallacious arguments.
Okay.
Trying to say that the country's in the best possible shape. What does it profit you or any other politician to have the finest, most prosperous province in the country if you have no standards of doing public business acceptable to ordinary decent people?
Jack, there is nothing wrong with the standards of government today. They have never been better. All that I'm saying to you is that your total preoccupation with piffle and nonsense is discrediting you as media people. Yes, our government may get discredited as well, but it doesn't do any benefit to the people of British Columbia either way. The press needs to be objective, and the press needs to be able to deal with substance as well as image, and the government needs to be able to govern with important things as well as the nonsense you get preoccupied with.
All right, I don't happen to be one of your hitmen, and nobody has a better reputation than I have, or record, of passing legitimate information on to the public in the media in British Columbia. I'll give you a case in point. The Preluption Report, the Eckert Inquiry, first raised by the NDP, the finger, Gracie's finger, right? Allegations made, some substantiation to them. Your government surrenders to the allegation and appoints a lawyer to inquire. What has happened to the Preluption Report? Why has it not been publicized? Why are those who make the allegations not demolished by the Preluption Report?
Jack, every one of these matters raised by the media where there has been some modicum of possibility of substance to them, those have been referred for investigation by appropriate authorities, sometimes the police, sometimes outside commissions, but in any event, in every case by people whose responsibility and experience would make it possible for them to get to the bottom of it. We have a stack of reports that high in government, of inquiries and commissions that we have entered into because of media criticism and opposition criticism. The problem is that every time we get down to the substance of these things, it evaporates. Why?
McGeer.
Because there isn't substance there. And all I say to you is, the gloves are off as far as I'm concerned. I've had it, and I think that it's time the media ought to get down to the substance of government, and I'll continue to say that as long as I remain in public life.
You mean you're putting up a specious smokescreen without answering specific questions?
No, I'm saying to you, pull up your socks.
Mr. Dr. McGeer, had you been handling, do you remember what happened in the dirty tricks thing after some researcher makes what he doesn't know to be a public statement about writing phony letters? And the Premier was in Japan, and you had a deputy Premier, and for month after month, with your caucus chairman going on fishing trips, nothing was ever done to reassure the public about anything until the media kept hitting it. And even then, the questions weren't answered. Am I correct in my assessment of that?
All we did, Jack.
Am I correct in what I said?
All we did was two things.
Yes, I am.
Get rid of the people that caused the problem.
How long did it take you?
Which happened, and the media criticized us for this. And secondly, to find out if there were matters of substance there by referring it to the police. Now, isn't it too bad that the police report didn't back up all the allegations that you made? Isn't it too bad? That kind of stuff,
You mean allegations
Jack,
that
in
I
the long
made?
term, you look down the road 5 or 10 years and
about writing the phony letters.
Examine the record of the media, the things they've raised in the last few years, and see whether there is substance or whether it's just image. Strings
I
and
was
mirrors.
present in the House the other day talking about image when
That's
a
what-
man called Barrett was questioning a man called Bennett on perfectly simple, straightforward questions, and not once did the Premier answer a simple, straightforward question. Do you want a sample of them?
I don't think we
You
need
don't
to
want
go
to,
through
do
a
you?
sample of them.
You know what
but
I'm saying.
But I can tell you about the House, and I can tell you what we ought to do with the House. I'll say it right
Put it
before
on
you listen.
television.
Put it on television.
Why didn't you do it?
Put it on
Why haven't you
television.
done it?
I think we should do it.
Why
And
haven't you done it?
And you know why we should do it? Because the people would be able to see for themselves what goes on in that House, and they wouldn't have to depend on individuals like yourself to interpret it for them. And once the people are able to see for themselves the quality of the opposition, the quality of the Premier, and the quality of the government, yes, then the government will be secure. It's the best thing that we could possibly do, because the people would be able to see for themselves and judge for themselves, and not depend upon you and others for information. When you deal with image and not substance.
Do you agree with me that if you did have television cameras in the House tomorrow, that the standard of debate and the standard of behaviour all round would improve by 10,000% from its present abominably low level?
You bet it would.
Oh,
You
you've
bet it
agreed
would.
on something.
Oh, yes. You bet it would.
And you'll
that would
agree,
be-
you'll
and that would
agree
be-
that the reputation of your government in handling matters of substance has been extraordinarily poor?
No.
What about the Marguerite?
I'd say, Jack...
What about
in
the
having-
Marguerite?
Yes, I'd love to talk about the Marguerite.
That was it.
Ah, now, Jack, you see, you get to the media.
I know a fair bit about the Marguerite.
Sure, the media drinks its own bathwater.
No,
and
not
so you
its
think
own
there's going to be
bathwater.
you think there's going to be a disaster in Victoria this summer.
No.
We'll have that conversation
I'm
in the
merely
fall
going-
after the summer
I'm-
has passed, and that more people than ever will have been to Victoria, and they'll have had their biggest tourist season in history. Then we'll have this conversation, and you tell us whether the social credit government did the wrong thing. You're judging it before the act, you see? And again, that's image and not substance. After the summer's over, and the
Come
substantive
off it,
part...
Dr. McGeer. Any government that took off a day ferry to make it into a night ferry and it condemned an apparently seaworthy ferry for some esoteric reasons of its own without spending a few $1 million obviously didn't know if it was punched or bored.
You see, you've brought it all out with the word apparently. You're not dealing with
Well,
fact.
as a fact.
You're dealing
they
with
took
opinion.
a day ferry, they're altering it to a night ferry. They took a night ferry which needed some work on it. They brought the other disastrous ferry, the Queen of Surrey, spending fortunes on it. Meanwhile, leaving the people in the north without transportation for a 6 or 7 week period. These are not apparent facts. These are facts, good Dr. McGeer. And really, you shouldn't be so hyper in this kind of thing because you're losing your cool and you're losing your point.
No, Jack. All I'm saying is the important thing is to move tourists in and out of Victoria for the summer season. When the summer is over, we will find that more tourists than ever have been moved in and out of Victoria, that the merchants of Victoria have had the biggest season they've ever had in history, and that the public is happy, despite all the foaming and frothing of the press.
You see, you're going to tell me all about
We'll
it in
have
the
this
fall. That's right. But
That's
the
right.
Premier won't answer a simple question in the House. The Lord knows why not. As to whether or not he had a legitimate meeting in his office with a bunch of businessmen in Victoria about the jet file.
The question
He
that
did
is-
have.
I imagine. The
You
question,
imagine.
the
Oh, you're
question,
going
Jack,
in-
I wasn't there.
Apparently, you
I
don't
wasn't
know.
there, but I can tell you this. As a minister of the Crown, if I want people from the media to attend the meetings, I'll invite them. What we announce is
Well,
policy.
the media was asking
and what
the
government
questions.
has
It
what the
was
government has announced
Barrett
is
who was
policy.
asking the
And
questions.
the substance, Jack, that's important, and what's important to the citizens of British Columbia is do the policies work for them? All your frothing and the waving of arms and the criticism of the government is not going to amount to anything if at the end of the season what I see is going to happen happens. Namely, more people than ever moved, the best season ever, and people who are satisfied. Now you're
Well,
so convinced,
just a
you're so
minute,
convinced
please.
that the government has botched all this thing, you don't even want to know what's going to happen during the tourist season. What we've said is we've
How
produced
did
an
we get on
answer.
in detail into this?
Well, you were the one that raised the issue, not me. All I'm saying is that it's piffling nonsense, and that at the end of the summer, the best solution ever for the people of British Columbia and the people of Victoria will have come to pass. And I say that that's substance.
Dirty tricks, well handled by the government.
All I say is that it was image and not substance. And when we got down to the
you would have
substantive
preferred
issue,
that we not report it, correct?
No. I say go ahead and report. All I say is that come around a little bit and deal with some of the things that are important to the government and important to the people.
I can't
If you
think of
de- if
anything
you-
offhand that your government has done apart from the moratorium on the nuclear mining and the $24 million towards housing and a highways program, vague talk of Dentacare about which we get no details whatsoever, talk of your tunnel underneath the whatnot. I can't really think of anything you have actually done since you came into power. Can you refresh my non-substantive memory? Apart from the magnificent administration we are assured goes on behind the doors.
Well, Jack, isn't it strange that British Columbia last year had the greatest year in its history, except for this year, which will be even greater? The prosperity
God bless
that we've
inflation.
had, the prosperity that we've had, the confidence that has allowed the economy to grow and people to have security. That sort of thing doesn't happen by accident. When we took over government in 1975,
don't need
Jack...
this.
Oh, I know you don't need it because you don't want to hear it.
You're not going to
It
tell
just
me
happens
anything
to be-
anyway.
It just happens to
Okay,
be the truth.
I'll listen. I'll listen. When you took
Thank
over
you.
in 1975, you pulled the province up by its bootstraps, gave us magnificent administration, and it's never been better run nor more prosperous. Is that right?
You've got it right.
I can parrot your phrases anytime you
Fine.
like.
And you know why it's important to say it again and again, even though you don't want to hear it? Because it's true. I had a reporter come
I
up to me
gotta
last
tell you
night and
something.
said, what's the difference between what we're doing now to Bennett in 1980 and what happened to Barrett in 1975? What's the difference? I said, look at the state of the province. That's the difference. We were in a ditch in 1975 and we've got prosperity in
Any
1980,
reporter
and
has-
that is an accident. And if your reporters began to look at the substance of government, you would discover that that isn't an accident. That's what we complain
Any
about.
reporter who came up and said that to you last night was, and I say this with deliberation, an absolute halfwit. The function of a reporter is to report, and
You
if he's
called
a,
them halfwits,
and
not me.
if he's a commentator or a reasonably informed person, is to criticise and to be against the government. And for your sake, Dr. McGeer, you know perfectly bleeding well that I've been against all governments where the occasion demanded it, because we're not going to sit here. I'm not going to sit here and lick your butts if you were, which you're not, the best government in the world.
Well, Jack, all I'm saying is...
You
make
haven't
your-
answered specific
all
questions.
I'm saying
You've
is...
merely come in here today and said, we're wonderful. What the media talks about is piffle.
That's
the
right.
Vogel inquiry was not piffle. That was a good inquiry, but it was done the wrong way. I believe Vogel was cleared, but if you had been Premier, you would have made that a public inquiry, as in the Seaton inquiry, wouldn't you?
Jack, that was handled in the way it should... Sure. I'll tell you what's going to come out of it, though. That is a suit against the media, because the sorts of things that were reported were totally false.
Are you
and
talking
know
about
that.
the CBC?
I am.
All right.
They're going to face a lawsuit.
That's
And
their problem.
The
big
laws-
boys.
the lawsuits, sure, but the lawsuits are the last resort of an individual to protect his reputation and character in society.
I'm very much surprised.
The media and the Vancouver Sun, we've discussed them, they keep the most expensive lawyers in town working for them to defend them against libel suits. Why? Because they're in trouble all the time. That's why.
You've missed a good point, by the way.
You
Just a moment,
just
please.
ask why the
Just-
media
just
needs
a
to have
moment, please.
expensive
I know all
lawyers
about lawyers
held
and
on
libel
retainers.
suits. Listen, you missed a good story. You failed. You didn't come here with your homework properly done.
Ask me.
What
Are you going to talk about the latest CBC allegation
Yes.
of a letter?
I want you to talk about it.
Sure. Okay.
I mean, your
Every-
case is so weak up to now. I'd like to give you a chance to use something with some strength in it.
It pains me, Jack, to talk about piffle. But here's a case. Every letter that comes into my office gets logged. And if somebody says they wrote a letter to me, I can soon find out if that...
Efficient. I doubt very much if all of your cabinet colleagues operate the same efficient system, Dr. McGeer.
Well, all I say is that if the letter exists, which I don't believe, somebody ought to be able to produce that letter. Now, it's possible.
Just a minute, shall
Since
I?
it goes through the Canadian
Just a
Post
moment,
Office, that the
please.
letter never was delivered and was actually posted.
You haven't
But the
given
person
the-
who made the allegation never knew that that letter was received, and no record of it can be found.
An allegation
It's
was
piffle
made.
anyway.
You're making it worse piffle if you don't explain it properly. You're the university professor, not me. Dear listener, an allegation was made against social credit government, to it the Premier, that the day after the famous seminar when dirty tricks were advocated by one Kelly, that a letter had been written to the Premier himself and a conversation had been made with Grace McCarthy. Now, unless you can spell it, I'll spell it. It was a bad story on the face of it because the name of the accuser was not given to those accused. And that is a breach of reporting responsibility as far as I'm concerned. Is that what you were trying to tell the listeners?
No, I was trying to tell them the letter doesn't exist. If it does, nobody's been able to find it.
Well, I believe that, but now I've made sense of it for them.
Thank you.
When are you quitting the government?
Not quitting the government. I've never been prouder of a government, Jack.
Are you no longer a liberal in any way, shape, or form?
I'm a social creditor, you know that.
How can I believe anything else you've told me if you tell me that? Will you always stand by Premier Bennett through thick and thin, or will you retire before the next election?
I have never given any date for retirement, but what I have said is that I would prefer not to be in government, and it's been that way for some years.
You're going to quit soon. How soon?
Oh, I'm not giving any date when I'll leave.
But soon.
Not soon, no.
This year.
Not this year.
Next year.
Who knows?
Dr. Pat McGeer. Give me that. Well, now what? That obviously, you could see it on a brown jacket, was done yesterday afternoon. And it was, to say the least, a very spirited performance by Dr. McGeer. My own performance was adequate, I think. I don't know. Piffle, 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 piffle. I didn't actually count the number of times that Dr. McGeer said, and I, of course, was voluntarily taking on the role of all the sins of commission and omission and rectitude and otherwise of the entire media, but that was my pleasure. I'm just wondering what I should do now. I think there'll probably be a fair response to that program this morning, and I think I might go for a poll this morning, P-O-L-L, a poll, a telephone poll. But I want to set a question to it. You know, I don't just like taking yeses and nos, but I don't want long harangues. We had enough of a harangue between the good Dr. McGeer and the Claude Webster in the last 25 minutes and 15 seconds plus commercial time. So the question should be, do you support... Was he talking piffle, or was I talking piffle? Do keep your comments short and to the point. I'll keep a count, but I'd like one sentence from you in the form of a poll on who was talking piffle. The press, the radio, the television, the Websters of the world, all the McGeers of the world. He's an unusual man, Dr. McGeer. He's a charming fellow. I really mean that quite sincerely. And the only time I stopped him cold, if you were watching the interview closely, was when I asked him if he was still a liberal. And there was really a second, excuse me, take a break, clear my throat, put up the numbers, and let's do the piffle thing. Yeah. Here we go on the piffle poll. For him or against him, and a short, just a short sentence of, if I may say so, not piffle, but substance. Go ahead, please.
Jack?
Yeah.
I think it was a pitiful performance with both of you.
Both piffle. Thank you, ma'am. Go ahead, please.
Yes, it's all piffle. McGeer certainly won that round, and get on with the business of government and stop this nonsense.
Thank you. 2 for piffle. Go ahead, please.
Mr.
My name is Webster.
Hello, yes, Mr. McGeer is a SOB.
Oh, no, don't want any of that nonsense. I know where you stand, however. Go ahead, please.
Morning, Jack.
Morning.
Dr. Patrick McPiffle and his band of arrogant buffoons in Victoria, I think, have to go.
Patrick McPiffle.
Right.
Say it once again.
Patrick McPiffle.
Doctor.
Dr. Patrick McPiffle of UBC.
How about Dr. Patrick Piffle? No, McPiffle, son. No, let's make it just straight Piffle instead of Mac Piffle.
Okay, Piffle.
Thank you. Go ahead, please.
Mr. Webster.
Yes.
You did a wonderful performance, and it's all piffle with McGeer. I'll tell you that. And their credibility as a government, I think, has gone right down the drain.
Thank you. Go ahead, please.
Such nonsense from McGeer. He surely showed himself up today. And what substance can you talk about the government if they haven't had any? They don't discuss anything of substance in the government. You missed a good one, too, and you didn't bring up the Panko deal.
Oh, Panko Piffle.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was a good one.
Yeah, okay, Jack.
Sorry, did the best I could. Go ahead, please.
Yes, I don't think either of you were talking piffle. I think at various times the press makes mountains out of molehills, and at various times the government tries to sweep things under the rugs. But basically, I don't think there was any piffle at all.
Was it a healthy exchange?
Yes, I really do. I think it was very, very good.
Thank you, sir. Victoria.
Mr. Webster.
Yes, sir.
Yes, piffle indeed. I want to stress that the kind of confrontation that took place is the healthiest, most therapeutic thing for all concerned. I think it's just fabulous that people can be so gutsy and courageous to come out and be so straight with each other as you have done. Congratulations to both of you.
Thank you. 2 pluses for piffle. Where am I going? Sydney on 2-6. Sydney.
Morning, Jack.
Morning.
I enjoyed your performance, but I was kind of glad Mr. Bennett Sr. was not able to see it. I think he would have been sick.
Fair enough, ma'am. Go ahead, please.
Good boy, Jack Webster. You took him like the grasshoppers took Kansas.
What did he say? Say it again if it's clean.
I said, good boy, Jack Webster. You took him like the grasshoppers took Kansas.
Oh, thank you. I never had that before. Took him like the grasshoppers took Kansas. Good. Go ahead, please.
Good morning, Jack.
Morning.
Jack, everything is okay. Pat McGeer is great. But I want you not to be so rude in the future. Please, don't change your attitude. You are a good reporter, but you really changed. It's not very nice. You interrupt him.
I thought I was a mild-mannered old marshmallow nowadays.
You have to look at yourself on TV. You're cleaning your ears, the hair is going out of your ears, and all this, and interrupting. It's not nice.
Thank you very much. Just one word to you, sir. It is not my intention merely to be a pretty face. Go ahead, please.
I thought it was an excellent discussion. I enjoyed it, but I felt you were the one who were aggressive and piffling. Thank you.
Webster the Piffle. Okay. Yes, go ahead, please.
I think Dr. McGeer should get the Victoria Cross. The Americans should strike a congressional medal for him. He should be a Knight Commander of the Order of Canada. It's about time you media guys got a kick in the ass, and he delivered some beauties, and boy, do you people need them.
Thank you, sir, but do clean up your act. Go ahead, please.
Congratulations, Jack. That was one of the best interviews you have ever given, and I've never seen a more disgusting performance by any MLA, and I've lived here all my life, which is 67 years. Thank you very much.
Thank you, ma'am. I hope Pat McGeer's watching. Go ahead, please.
Mr. Webster, I was very pleased to hear you on your program because I think the people should hear what goes on in government. And so I would say that the piffle goes to McGeer.
Thank you, ma'am. Go ahead, please.
Good morning. I think if you look at it, I think news is kind of slow coming out of Victoria right now. And I think that the media is clutching at straws to blow these things way out of proportion.
I didn't blow it. McGeer made the attack, and I decided that you should have the benefit of a balanced performance between McGeer and myself.
Oh, I was okay in that respect, but my vote goes with McGeer.
Oh, and news certainly is slow out of Victoria today, and all season. There's no doubt about it. McGeer and I agreed on one thing. If there were cable television coverage of the legislature, the performance of the NDP and Social Credit would improve by 10,000%.
I'm with you there. That's absolutely correct.
Thank you. Go ahead, please.
If McGeer sees that program, he will stop any idea of ever going on television. He was god-awful. Thanks.
Thank you, ma'am. Prince George. Glad it's not Prince Charles. Go ahead, Prince George.
If evading to answer questions the way he did is piffle, I would say that Dr. McGeer is full of piffle.
Thank you. Patrick Piffle, full of it. Robson, British Columbia.
Good morning, Mr. Webster.
Morning.
You were magnificent. You're just like the dragon, you know. Today's the Dragon Day for the British. And I think that Dr. McGeer should come to the West Kootenays and see what is happening to the forest industry and have his head examined. Thank you for
Well, he's a neurological researcher. He can even do that himself.
Well,
Thank you, ma'am. Go ahead, please.
Good morning. The Socrates, it's easy to see, want to control press now. And you certainly should have brought up Panko Poultry, Jack. Thank you.
Thank you. I should have brought up Panko Poultry. Oh, a number of things I should have brought up. You can't keep these things going forever. Go ahead, please.
Yes, I thought it was an excellent program this morning, and I really do want to congratulate Mr. Dr. McGeer to inform the people the truth and really bring forth what really has been going on and what is going on. And I really do think the media do need to bring up their socks, pull up their socks, and get on with things of more importance.
Thank you, ma'am. That's the McGeer viewpoint. That's the Piffle viewpoint. After the break. You can't really keep a count on a piffle poll, but I would say that honours between the contestants broke about even that time round. And it's not Patrick Piffle, I was wrong. It's McGeer, so it's Patrick McPiffle. Now, your response to the piffle poll. Go ahead, please.
On?
Yes, you're on.
The press should be proud of you, Mr. Webster.
It's what?
The press should be real proud of you.
Oh.
It takes one of the boys from the old school to go to bat for the press and win like you did.
Here, here.
I'll tell you something, my son.
Yes, yes.
The Canada Medal for your performance.
Here, here.
God bless you.
Where is it? I had one kicking around, but I seem to have dropped it in the garbage. Thanks very much.
Welcome.
He's a pro-Webster piffle, I think, without any doubt. Go ahead, please.
Good morning, Jack.
Morning.
I give a star to you. Mr. McGeer was full of piffle as usual.
Thank you, ma'am. It's his word. Go ahead, please.
Well, you were both great. But believe me, the today's type newspaper person wouldn't have handled it the same way. The reason being that the cardinal sin of a good reporter is slanting the news. And this is what today's journalists, supposedly, they're not really journalists, do all the time. And my side is Pat McGeer.
Good. Well, I'll say something in all fairness here. I have in front of me the Vancouver Sun article done by the people whom he described as the hit squad, Linda Diebel and Paul Nicholson. From my knowledge, I know that a fair amount of it is solid. What bothers me about this story is that there is no time element involved in the quotes. This is a very small technical point. Van der Zam says this is Bennett's image problems out in the open. And of course, Marjorie Nichols has been carving him up with a, what's the word for a big sword? Not a little sword. No, what's the word? No, not a kind of saber. Cleaver's good enough. Well, she made a crack that Bennett couldn't even tie his shoes, I think. Is that what she said? Let's see what Marjorie said. Where is it? Where is it? Without questioning McGeer's veracity, it strains credulity to imagine that this man, who in public can't tie his own shoelaces, could behind closed doors be reincarnated into a decisive, insightful leader. In the image story, which really set Linda Diebel and Paul Nicholson, and that's the story that set McGeer off, there's a lack of a time element in the story, and that makes it a little bit difficult for me to accept it as a spot news story. That's a very small technical quibble from my point of view. By and large, the material is what is gossiped in the corridors of Victoria among the press and the politicians. Next one. Have I spoken to you? Yes, I have. Go ahead, please.
Hello, Jack.
Yes.
I am dispelled on this guy here. He is a donkey. He has had my vote for the last time. I'm glad you had this guy on here.
Tell the truth. You never voted for him before.
We sure have.
You don't even live in Point Grey.
Yes, we do.
Oh, you do?
Yes.
And you're a liberal, are you?
No, I'm a social credit. I was. Now you've had this donkey on here. I'm just glad you held your temper, Jack.
Thank you very much, sir. Put him down as doubtful. Yeah. Go ahead, please.
Why don't you start a school for reporters? We don't get the good reporters anymore. I am with McGeer all the way on that. Really and truly, what has happened? Do they not go to the same school anymore? They not get out and hustle for their news?
Dare I say it? Nobody gets fired anymore.
Well,
however, that's beside the point. One of the difficulties of covering the legislature in Victoria is that it becomes too easy. In Victoria, in the press gallery, very good guys there, they have a monitor. They can hear the debates at any given time. They've got Hansard, they've got the blues. Questions are asked in the House at 2 o'clock, and by 4 o'clock in the afternoon, they've got the Hansard transcript of the questions. In my day, the bad old days, and I first covered the legislature in 1949, and I was over there covering it for The Sun in 1953, there was no Hansard. There was no monitor. The galleries were jammed with reporters, at least from The Sun and the Province and the agency and a few other people in those days, and there was competition. You had to be in the House to know what was happening. And furthermore, and this was a very telling thing in print, we had newspaper competition. I was covering, for instance, the legislature for The Sun, and covering for the Province was a guy called Fred McNeil, who somewhat outdistanced me in life. He later became chairman of the board and chief executive officers of the Bank of Montreal, and is now a very big wheel in the financial community. And the competition between Webster and McNeil to get stories for the home edition, or for the first edition next day, was positively fierce. But we had to sit in the House. We had to take our own notes, and we used to actually carry running copy on occasions. It was a different situation. Now with all the various types of media and the facilities available, reporters don't have to spend so much time in the House, and that's the best education for any reporter.
Not the quality of the people. You know, I think you should...
It's a different thing nowadays. The newspapers have not adjusted to the new role. Spot news, by and large, is covered by radio and, to some extent, by television. The newspapers give on a good day. You might get a column of news from Victoria in the Vancouver Sun. One column of news.
I could write that Marjorie Nichols column with my eyes shut, because it's been the same for the last 8 months. Never changes.
Marjorie is a very powerful and effective columnist who takes a position, and these people are the breath of life to politics in British Columbia, no matter who is in power. And if you look back over Marjorie's record in the NDP days, you'll find there were occasions when she was just as effective and strident as she is against Bennett.
Sounds paranoid to me.
Not a bad diagnosis, perhaps, for some of us in the media. I'm the only sane one I know. Thank you. Am I sane? Go ahead, please.
Yes, it was a good performance. But the thing that amazes me, you come back to the same dirty tricks and all the other garbage that you're talking about in the media. And the only thing that surprises me, you didn't have Marjorie Nichols there, too. And if I'd have been Jack McGeer, I'd have taken the microphone and I'd have jammed it down your throat. Because I just think you're carrying on to try and stir up things so you get listeners. And I vote for McGeer.
Thank you, sir. Chetwynd? Cache Creek.
Cache Creek, good morning.
Morning.
I have to go with Mr. McGeer.
Good.
I think that you're being your usual arrogant self. You wouldn't let Mr. McGeer make his point. He might as well have spoken to a wall as try and talk to you.
Fair enough. Respect your viewpoint. Thanks for calling me. I must take my last break. That was the last call. Thank you. Only thing that bothered me about that this morning is the country's falling apart on a national basis, and here we're arguing about piffle.
Piffle, yes.
On local piffle. Maybe McGeer has a point. We're not planned yet for tomorrow, are we?
No, few decisions to be made yet about tomorrow's show.
Well, I'm happy anyway. We'll have a good program tomorrow. I am fully confident. Piffle or no piffle.
Okay.
9 a.m. precisely.